right, welcome to our podcast today. We are talking about location, location, location. And this topic came up. Sandy, you've moved in the last few years. You've moved a couple of times, and I moved a few years ago. And I was listening to a podcast, and they were interviewing somebody who was from New Jersey, I think, and she had found her sky. She said, I looked in the sky and I knew I was home in Colorado.
Wow.
I
Wow.
know.
Okay.
Exactly. So I was
Get
thinking of you
that
because
though.
you're in Colorado. But so she had been a city dweller pretty much in New Jersey, and she has a ranch now in Colorado to the point where she has that ranch still. And I wish I could tell you specifically who this was. I could figure it out if I tried really hard, but she is married to somebody in California, and she still keeps her ranch in Colorado to as her private space.
Wow.
And so anyway, it's just really interesting because she's like, that's where I feel whole. That's where my home is. So anyway, I was listening to the podcast. I'm like, Sandy, we need to talk about what makes a location a home. And because you've moved a few times, I'm thinking of moving at some point. I'm a bit nomadic. So,
And I think it's actually a conversation. It's been a struggle because I am of nature somebody who doesn't like to move, and I struggle with that because I find happiness where I'm at. And it's actually been a conversation with Garrett and I. Conversation, I say probably one of the arguments,
oh,
uh,
really?
over the last, I don't know, 4 years. So I'm anxious to talk about this because I really had a hard time with this. And the end of the story is the truth was somewhere in the middle. So I had strong feelings. Garrett had strong feelings. I thought he didn't know what he didn't know. He thought I didn't know what I didn't know. And then we finally took a leap of faith. And we took a few leaps of faith, actually, because there was even, so really quickly, and then we'll keep on talking. Shows how non-nomadic I was. I was raised in Remsen, Iowa, the same house, 19 years. That's all I knew. And in fact, here, I'm going to show you. My mother, the house actually burned, not to the ground, they rebuilt it, but as I know it, this is an ornament of that house that my mother painted for me because I get very affectionate to houses and places and neighborhoods, and it brings me a lot of joy to talk about being raised in that house, the next door neighbors. It just brings me a lot of joy. Then I moved to Omaha, 30 years in Omaha. No, wait. Yes, that would be 30 years in Omaha and only two houses, Amy.
Wow.
One house for 10 years, one house for 20. And before I left Omaha, I would drive by the old house. I will reminisce. So I get attached to, and I loved Omaha and I loved Iowa. And it's so funny because back to location, do you hear people say, oh, I love Iowa, blah, blah, blah. Usually people are talking about, I want to get out. That was never me. I was very happy where I was at. And so when we were empty nesters, and the plan always was, so second marriage for both Garrett and I, he was in Denver, but his background is he's been all over the place. He was born in Santa Monica. I think he was in Arizona for a while. He was raised in Indiana, a couple of different places, pretty much one, I think. But in his adult life, they lived everywhere. They lived Texas. They lived Virginia, several places on the East Coast. And even once they moved to Denver, they were the people that liked the house a block down and moved there. Like I would never do that. Like,
Yeah.
it's my house. And he has more of an, like you said, Amy. And so I can't wait to hear what you have to say, a nomad existence. And so he's like, this is so fun. We get to go new. And I'm like, but it's so great here in Omaha. And we have everything. And look at my wonderful friends and this life. Why in the world? So when it became real, like it was time to do it, we talking about it is one thing, but once my baby bird became a senior and it's like, oh my God, he's serious about this. It was a struggle for me. And then long story short, we actually tried out Bozeman Montana for 6 months, Boise, Idaho for a year, and now we live in Durango, Colorado, and absolutely love it. But it was a journey. It was a journey.
So it's funny listening to you because Tom, my husband, is a lot like you. He settles in and he's very happy where he's at. And I grew up with a family that was we stayed in places, but like he stayed in his same house like you, growing up his whole childhood,
Felt very
and
comfortable, I bet.
very just comfortable, fine, happy house, you know. And just when we got married, we moved to Kansas City, moved him out of St. Louis to Kansas City. And just getting him to do that was, you know, that was difficult. And I'm always the instigator of the moving in our family.
You and Garrett, Amy, you and Garrett.
And my family, we stayed kind of, so my parents, I'm just going to say it always felt like they were open to moving. If an opportunity came up, then they moved. You know, it wasn't like, no, we're here, we're staying here, we're never moving. That was never a conversation. It was always like, we're sure, let's do it. You know, so there was a little bit of an adventurous spirit that I grew up with. And I will say there was one thing that happened when the summer of my senior year, well, actually, like the spring of my junior year in high school, my dad got a job in Kansas City and we were living in Arkansas.
Okay.
And so that summer before my senior year, we moved up to Kansas City. And going through that at that age was really challenging. I mean, it's never a good, it's never, I'm going to say most seniors would never look forward to moving their
Right.
senior year, you know?
Right. That is like the worst year to do it.
Right. But talk about a game changer from my perspective of a lot of things happened. I realized that you can find happiness anywhere. I kind of realized that. I learned that I could make friends because I left children. I left all my friends that I had grown up with for, you know, all my school years because we were a small school and we went all the way from grade school to high school all together.
Love it.
And so there were some things that came about, and I've always thought those were really good life lessons because I went into college knowing that, you know, it was up to me to make the most of it. And so as far as creating that community, creating those friends, creating that, so I think that kind of has made me a little bit more nomadic in spirit because I'm not actually that nomadic. I know people who move all the time and I'm not there, but I'm open to it. I'm always open to it.
There was a lady that I do work with, it was a company I do work with, and they played a Jeopardy game and they used questions. People provided questions about themselves and they asked people, make sure to give something that nobody knows about you. And I'll never forget this. One of the gals had moved like 18 times before she graduated from high school. And
Wow.
and then when I asked her about it, I'm like, that's crazy. And she said they literally just kept their boxes because they knew they would move. And there was a book called Glass Castle, and this was more about poverty. And it was very good, but better. It's time to skedaddle. It's time to skedaddle. They would move to something new. And that's what I would think of. Now, Amy, one funny thing with me and Garrett's situation is my parents were a big impact on me being open-minded and really just finally saying, let go and try this out, because my parents both grew up in that little town, Remsen, Iowa. They didn't date through grade school or high school. They knew of each other, but that was it. I mean, they knew each other, but they didn't do things together. But they graduated in the same graduating class. They went K through 12 in Remsen. They raised their kids in Remsen, K through 12. My dad was the barber. My mom, after we went to school, I think I was in 3rd grade, she worked at the telephone company. But guess what they did, Amy? I graduated from high school And I came home on Christmas break of my freshman year, and I only went 9 miles away from my hometown.
Oh,
Okay.
to
And
college.
9 miles away. And my parents said, we're moving to Las Vegas. And I'm like, you're what? And I'm not kidding you. By the next summer, they sold the house. They sold all their belongings except for what they could fit in the back of a truck. They ultimately didn't, they moved, they went to Vegas, decided it was too big and kept driving. And they ended up in northern Arizona, in Kingman, Arizona. And they've been there since 1986. My dad sold his business to another barber. He owned property that he kept for some years, business property. And so Garrett would say to me, your parents did this, Sandy. You know, this is not, your parents did this. And
Right.
it was, I always thought about what my parents said. What a leap of faith, Amy. You know, what a leap of faith for them to just pick. They knew no one there. You know, back
Right.
to location. And they would tell you when I would ask my dad, and I haven't asked him very often, but maybe a few times over the years, what's the biggest thing you regret? What would you do differently? And he said, I wish I would have done it sooner. Because they waited until we graduated. And part of me made me sad. It's like, well, you waited, you know, and he's like, but we love it so much here. His point is the move was very good for them. They loved the weather. They liked the area that they lived. They loved their lifestyle. And uh, it wasn't that I shouldn't take it personally because, well, it's all about your kids and they weren't, but it was the fact that it brought them a lot of happiness that he wished he would have more of. And there's nothing wrong with that.
That's just so adventurous of them. I love it, especially being, you know, living in the same town all of those years. That's just really amazing.
And we
And then,
didn't do a lot of traveling, Amy. We didn't do, when I grew up, we drive to our vacations. We'd go north to Okoboji.
uh,
We did a lot of fun things, but I mean, the biggest ventures were drive. One time we drove to Kansas City. I wasn't on an airplane until I was 21. Now my parents started going on trips to Vegas when I was in high school in Arizona. And what I found out is they were kind of scoping it out. Or they went one time and they're like, we like this weather. We're sick of the winters. We want something different. Uh,
right.
but it wasn't like we traveled all over. Back to choosing location. You know, is it world travelers only that see different things and then say, here's where I want to move? Or you see these small town people that knew nothing but the small towns, and they still are adventurous. That to me, that's a huge leap of faith.
It is. That's great. Okay, so I found an article
Oh,
because,
good.
you know me.
Yep.
Ooh, we're talking about location. Um, 17 questions to ask yourself before moving to a new city. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I thought these were all really good. And I will say the beginning of them, the majority of them are, can I afford it? You know, what's the cost of living? Will I like anybody there? How much does it cost to register my vehicle? Like taxes, school systems, gas, da 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 da.
Cost of living. Yep.
You know, a lot of it, and when should I leave? The timing. Um, okay. Then there's the good questions. So after all the logistical questions, I'm just going to call them, it was a little bit more, what am I losing if I leave? Okay. So I was thinking about these questions, and because, you know, I'm contemplating, I have a senior in high school, and Tom and I are contemplating where we're going to go, what we're going to do, if we're going to stay, you know, what it looks like after this. Because we have a house for 6 people and we don't need a house for 6 people in the next.
Tell you that's one thing I don't miss is downsizing houses is a good thing. Other than my friends that have a lot of grandkids now, they
Yeah.
like having a little bit more space. But yeah, I get that, Amy, on a house for 6 people.
Yeah. So what am I losing if I leave? You know, and I'm going to say the hardest thing that, what do you lose when you leave? It's it's the sense of community that you've made. It's
Totally.
friendships. It's Even they were talking, one of the things was, your favorite restaurant.
Totally. I get all this. Those,
Yeah.
and they're right. I mean,
Yeah.
they've nailed those things. They've
Right.
nailed those things. I'll tell you, Amy, what's funny is we had a spreadsheet. And one thing I will add in the notes or add once we're done is I wrote an article for a local magazine here, and it's called Durango Neighbors. And the article talks about how people, everybody's from somewhere, and people say, how did you choose Durango? And for Garrett and I, it was a spreadsheet. Because what you're talking about, and I tell you, Amy, Garrett's probably forwarded this article to me, because over the years he would, when we were deciding, he would find these articles, and we had pulled together a spreadsheet with the criteria, but they weren't about the things you were leaving, which was probably what weighed on me more. He didn't worry about that part, but he focused on what are the criteria. And we had a spreadsheet, and I've actually shared that with some people that are looking to go to other places. Their criteria might be different, but there are websites you can go to and compare to cities and look at cost of living, days of sunshine. That was a big one for us.
Yeah.
Average temperature during winter, because we want winters because skiing, right? But we want winters that it snows and it goes away the next day, right? So what does that look like? Days of sunshine is really big for me.
Yeah.
Not too windy, but there were a lot of weather things, a lot of cost of living. And we went higher on the cost of living, but you need to know that what's the trade-offs here. But this spreadsheet, it started with a spreadsheet, but what the gist of the article is it ended up in what brought, that's what chose the location. But what cemented being here was the community. It was the neighbors, it was the people. And they for me, they didn't replace the things I left in Omaha, but those were the things I was ultimately seeking, on top of all the different things, all the spreadsheet items that you can
Right.
Google.
All
That,
it was beyond the logic.
it was
Like,
beyond the logic.
yeah, there's the spreadsheet feels very logical, like check, 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 check. But then there's this emotional piece and
Right.
this community piece that you can't get that off the spreadsheet.
And
It's from,
neighbors are a big thing. For me, back to one of the reasons I've heard people tell horrible neighbor stories. My
yeah,
neighbors, we're family. I still have group texts, check-ins. A couple of them will jump in on my virtual book club. I mean, just yesterday, back to having COVID, there's 3 of us, and we'll text back and forth, and we know exactly, we're family.
yeah,
And I do miss, Garrett and I had our haunts for restaurants. Creighton basketball was fun. There were a lot of things that we really enjoyed. Now, I'll tell you, COVID has helped me a lot because none of those things are going on, right?
right. You
So
can't miss
I
it if it's
probably
not happening.
not, there was, when we were in Boise, they were going on, and I didn't miss them as much as I thought, because you do find ways to replace them and still cherish those things, that you had. Friendships, if they're real friendships, you stay in contact, and there's so many means to do that. But those were the hard things, the things leaving behind. I have one son who's still back there. I get it. Back to those questions, what do you leave behind? I've had people say to me, oh, you're so courageous because you moved. Well, I don't have as many things if somebody has all their grandkids and all their kids, well, that's tough to leave. Aging parents, right? A good job.
Right.
I can live anywhere and work. So I wasn't, even though I left wonderful, treasured things for me, they were much easier to leave than what other people have, like close-knit family members, the grandchildren, the jobs. So that makes a big difference.
And there's a sense of responsibility of, like, if you have kids in school, what's your responsibility to them to make sure that they're flourishing. And then, like you said, aging parents, things like that, that can hold you just because of that sense of responsibility.
But Amy, you bring up a great thing. I loved what you said about how it was so hard to move when you were a senior, and it ended up being a good thing, and you met people.
I
I
know.
was so hell bent. So one of the things I remember so well is when my divorce was done, I was in the hallway with my divorce attorney, basically knowing we were done. Thank you for all your help, all your work. It was probably as much emotional support because I just was, it's kind of like getting hit by a truck and your ER doctor telling you, walking you through what's going on and what you need to do. That's how it felt to me. And I remember he looked at me and he said, you're a traditionalist. You're going to get married. You will get remarried and you will marry somebody who's very traditional because that's the kind of person you are. You like your family unit. You like your husband. And what's funny is I think about that a lot because many would say I remarried very non-traditionally, right? Because of all the moving and living in two cities, but our relationship is very traditional. And with my kids, getting back to, I think he was right is my point, because there were times when I thought he was so off. Look at this. I'm the most non-traditional person ever. I think I'm pretty much I think he nailed my personality, right?
Right.
But it was so important to me that my kids were going to be raised in that house where they lived their whole life. They were going to graduate from those schools. And I was going to, other than not being married to their father, that Christmas tree, the Christmas mugs, all the traditions they were going to have until the day they walked out of that house. And because I was convinced that change, like your point on, we make decisions based off of our kids. But here's the funny part. Do you know to this day, they'll still bring up how their dad had lived in different places when we first divorced. And sometimes they would sleep on the couch or the floor and they met a variety of people. They talk about it with love and fun, and they enjoyed every second of it. And it does make me second guess myself. And then you bring this up and saying, I'm going to make sure they have this because this is what they need. But would change have been that bad? And actually what I thought I was protecting them from, they are some of their cherished memories. So again, you can't redo the past, but putting your stake in and saying, I can't do this because my kids can't. Is change bad or is change good? And is it the end of the world to move your kids? Or, we've talked about different scenarios, Tom being in one place, you moving around. My friend who has, she's raised wonderful kids. She's a beautiful woman and she moved 18 times. And is change bad or is change good? And is it the end of the world?
I'm going to say yes. Yes and no. It's not the end of the world by any means. Is change good? Yes. Is change bad? Yes, it can be bad too. Like moving my senior year, I would not wish that upon anybody, any child. I tried really hard and I didn't do it to my kids because I didn't want to put them through that year. It was very emotionally attached to my school. But yes, it was so good. It was so good for me about self-discovery, self-confidence. There was so much internal stuff happening. So it was super good. So it's a little bit about resilience, I'm just going to say.
That's a great word.
I think it's about building resilience and having that, I don't know if I would have stayed in Hot Springs, Arkansas. I don't know where my path would have gone. And it could have still been good. It could have still been great. But that year taught me resilience. It taught me how to carry on.
You know what I think the answer is with my kids as we're discussing this, because sometimes we're just talking out loud. The reality is they had a lot, whether I wanted to say, they have no change. I'm making everything, that Christmas tree is going to go in the same spot. I'm going to drive them on carpool. They had a ton of change. So the reality is they had a ton of change. And so it balanced with the stability of, so as much as I want to convince myself that, old bossy pants me had my way in keeping them with their stable environment, the reality of the situation is their lives were turned upside down.
Totally. Yeah.
So there was a reality, and they did learn resilience from that, Amy. You know,
Yeah.
right now, back to people are, where are your kids? They're very open to change and in a lot of different ways, whether it be work or they're very open-minded. And so I think that helped them. I like that word resilience. It taught them resilience because
Yeah.
for me, it was when my parents moved. I was actually kind of a big baby because I was already in college and I'm like, you can't move. You can't. I mean, I was the one who was like, what are you doing? And it was hard,
Yeah.
even though I was 19 years old. But it did teach me resilience. And I found that it was really kind of fun when I was in college and I went and spent a summer. I cherished the summer in college that Scott lived with them too. My first husband, he did an internship there. And we have the most cherished memories about spending a summer in Arizona.
Nice.
And maybe that opened our eyes to location, 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 right?
Right. Right. But you went back to Omaha, settled in, and
Yeah.
then,
And stayed there for 30 years.
there for 30 years.
That's what I did. So Amy, I'm curious what you think about, there was a phrase I would say to Garrett all the time. Okay. When we were going through this struggle of, oh my gosh, it's real. Are we really going to move? Like, I don't think why should we move? This is wonderful. And I kept saying to him, bloom where you are planted. Okay.
Yes.
And I would say that all the time. And I would say, I don't care if you and I were in, Fargo, North Dakota in the middle of winter, as long as I was with you, I would be happy. And he's like, but can't we have a few mountains by there too? And so that would be the sentence I would bring up, or the phrase is, bloom where you're planted. And is it that important? And why? And my point to him was, and I was pointing out his first marriage, you lived in Denver, the most beautiful place, for 20 years, and you had a lot of bad years there where you weren't happy.
Yeah.
Okay. So you lived in a beautiful place, but there was a lot of unhappiness that went with that. And, it's all about relationships, community, neighbors, all these things. Part of it is he had good friendships. I'm not trying to pick on him, but I'm just saying, that was my example, and go where you are planted. What are your thoughts on that? Bloom where you're planted.
I
Have you
love
thought
that.
about that?
I love that because I think you can make any place home, but you have to put some effort into it. You can't. So I think about my mom. My mom has traveled around through her later years through work. She spent some time in Australia. She's just been traveling her final years at work, and then when she retired, she decided she could live anywhere she wanted. It was just like this whole country was here. And she was like, where do I want to settle? Well, she decided to come to Omaha. Okay, so you have to know my mom. She's a California girl.
So she decided Omaha. Okay.
Yeah, she's a California girl, and then Arkansas. So both very warm areas. And she decided Omaha. Okay.
And what
Because,
time of the year did she move to Omaha?
well, that's the other kicker. I think it was October.
Okay.
So it was before winter, but it was the fall and it was nice. Um, so she chose Omaha because of us. She was like, you have 4 young children. Our kids were young at that time and in elementary school. And she's like, I just want to be around them doing all these activities and seeing all the stuff they're doing, which was great. Okay. And I was like, all right, come to Omaha. And I'm like, Mom, just so you know, winters are really cold. So, because she doesn't like cold weather.
And Mom, every February I look to move to
I
one.
know. Exactly. And I'm moving in February.
Well, be ready, Mom.
Be ready. So anyway, she moved and she lasted 2 years in Omaha, and I'm going to give her really good credit for lasting 2 years. She came to all the kids' events, but she never, what happened when one of the things that I think happened was she didn't embrace the community. What she did, she embraced us and followed us around, but she didn't have her own circle of friends. She was living in an apartment, and so she never became part of the Omaha community on her own, as she was always just our kids' grandmother, at the events.
Right. Huge point.
which was different. So she wasn't really settled here. I'm just going to say she wasn't settled. And so she ended up going to Las Vegas, and she bloomed there. Like you said, she bloomed because she planted herself there. She stopped traveling as much because she's a big traveler. So, when she was in Omaha, every other month she was going on a big trip. So she never had time. She didn't take the time to really bloom in her community. But in Las Vegas, she did. Las Vegas, she has so many circles of friends. She's doing volunteer. She's still there, and she loves it because she's engaged in her community, her neighborhood. She plays pinochle. Like, she's doing all this stuff, and she has her own circle of friends. So it's been fun to watch her be adventurous, pick a place. If I can go anywhere, where do I want to go? And then settle in. And also, like, she's talking about possibly moving again. And when I was with her, and we were discussing it, and one of the things that she said that really resonated with me, she's like, I can move and I can change my mind and come back.
Right.
It was very like, oh my gosh, isn't that true? You don't have to make a 20-year decision.
Right.
You can make a
It
year
makes
or
it
two
easier,
decision.
doesn't it, Amy, when you think that way too? Like nothing, there isn't, and even with kids, to say, okay, we moved here, we have to stay until they're seniors. You really don't have to.
Right. No.
And I've made the mistake of that. I moved in this house. We can't move. They started these schools. They can't change.
Mhm.
And I've erred on that side. And again, no harm, no foul, but
Right.
not thinking differently is a more liberating mindset. And it's a more happy mindset because you have choices, right?
Right.
What's interesting when you bring this up, and I forget about this part of it. It's easy for me to say, well, I lived in Omaha for 30 years. Well, Garrett and I, for 10 years, 8.5 years, we were together, that since 8.5 years, we've been together for 11 years. 8.5 of those, we traveled back and forth, and we had two houses, one in Denver and one in Omaha. So even though I maintained the one in Omaha, I would go to Denver at least every other week and sometimes longer. And I was not happy in Denver. Like, I never wanted to be in Denver. And it's what I like to say to people, and this is true, is it's too big. It's 2 million people. It's too big. But here's the reality. And Garrett used to say, why are you, because we actually bought a really nice townhouse on a golf course. I had the whole thing professionally decorated. It was all me. It had my fingerprint on it. And I guess I was going away from Bloom Where You Were Planted. But I remember telling him, I don't know the neighbors here. I don't have, Grant was still in school, and Ben too at the time. And I had my community of Scott High School. I had people I was still friends with from Wenceslas. I'm like, your kids, I'm not part of that. I felt like an outsider, right? They were nice to me, but I wasn't part of their community. And Amy, it's probably the one time in my life that I've really struggled because I couldn't wait to go home. And that probably led to my struggle of not wanting to leave Omaha, because it was a lot of the neighbors, the community, my friends. I didn't have any of that in Denver. And because our kids were the age that they were and we were much more social, I think it was even more obvious to me. It might
Right.
not be as obvious now because we're not as social, and we've learned we don't have those communities. So Garrett and I do more things together. But I didn't like Denver. I have no, it was fine. People are like, you go back and forth, you guys ski, you do all these fun things. And I don't want to sit here and be a Debbie Downer, but I did go against Bloom Where You're Planted because I didn't feel like I was planted. And blooming to me was more about community and relationship. I even for um, volunteer work. I remember trying to come up with ideas on
Right.
how to fit in better, and can we join, and we did things like that, which brought little pieces of happiness. We tried to join different Habitat for Humanity, or we do through his company drives, and that would help. But those were the things that brought me happiness in that location. And when I wasn't happy, it was because of, it wasn't about the sky, really. It was the most beautiful place and a beautiful home. I miss the people and the relationships.
So that's interesting because when my mom moved to Las Vegas, I found an article that talked about how to make where you live, your community, your home. And
Ooh,
in a
ooh. I wish you
way,
could find this again. I'd like to hear that.
well, one of the things, because my mom was a big traveler, and I remember one of the things was you need to stay in your space for a year and you have to fully immerse yourself in that space for a year. You
I think
can't,
that here makes a ton of sense.
well, exactly. And I remember I read it and I sent it to my mom because I wanted her to feel at home where she was because she was restless, and was looking for a place. And so that article was about how to settle in. And so she kind of did it. She kind of didn't because she still traveled. But you, it's resonating with what you just described because Omaha, you had that foundation. And
Yeah.
I think that year, you never got that year in Denver where you could build the foundation.
And so I
And then,
just missed what I had because I knew I couldn't wait to go back to what I had.
right,
And it made it even back to my not wanting to leave Omaha. I think it solidified with me of, oh my gosh, because I missed it and enjoyed it so much. Oh, here,
right, right. What am I doing? Why would I leave
I
this?
was giddy. It's Garrett and I, we're closed down here again. None of the restaurants are open. And because we had COVID, we literally hadn't been by anybody for a month, and quarantine's over. And finally we're like, okay, there's this takeout place and they have a COVID area where you can wait. And Garrett called me, the word we used was giddy because I was by other human beings. And I mean, blah, 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 I was playing with people's dogs. I'm talking. And he's like, it reminded him of like when I would go back to Omaha because I'm just like, oh, these are my people. And I don't even know these people. But he's like, it I miss that. That is one thing I miss in COVID because we have enjoyed meeting people in Durango and finding a community. And the word I'd use is giddy, which is probably how I felt because I never planted myself. I was there for 3 days, I was there for 4 days, and then I was back home again for a week and a half. But I was
Right,
so giddy when I would get back home with my foundational things that made me happy. Um,
right.
but that advice is really sound, back to talking to other people about location, because I will tell you, Bozeman was a 6-month experiment and Garrett was there the whole time and I came to visit, and it was cold. It was during the winter. We didn't get to see the change in seasons. We didn't see what it was like. Watch Yellowstone, you'll see what it's like all the way around. That's a lot of that is in Bozeman, but we were there for 6 months and no planting. What's funny is when we decided to leave Bozeman, it was basically because we didn't think we could take the winters, and we were testing it. um, Garrett, because he was there all the time, he was renting a house from a guy named Oki, who is older than my parents. And Oki, to this day, we're still friends on Facebook. And when we left Bozeman or decided against Bozeman, Garrett said, "What are you going to miss the most?" And I didn't even hesitate. I said, "Oki."
Yeah.
And
It's a
because we would go out to dinner with Oki, and it was just the guy that it was on the campus. He would usually rent to college kids, and it was 100%. If you say Bozeman, I say Oki.
yeah,
That's what I loved.
yeah.
And we were in Boise for a year, and I loved Boise, but we were there for a full year. I immersed myself in the community. My aunt lived there. She introduced me to all of her friends. She was walking distance from my house. Her son moved there. I felt like I got to know the community. I went to all the events. I loved neighbors. I became friends with the neighbors. I knew where the dogs were. And so we talked about the happiness factor episode. I think that was like one of the first ones. And I talked about my joyful year in Boise, which was not supposed to be joyful because I was the one kicking and screaming leaving Omaha.
Right,
And it was joyful for me. It wasn't joyful for Garrett, but he worked all the time
right, right.
and didn't get to meet people. He never immersed himself.
He
Great
never
point,
immersed
Amy.
himself.
Good
Yeah.
advice.
Well, I'm always reading articles and I
And
save
that
these
year
little
means a
nuggets.
lot.
But I think about, so my fear in moving, because we're contemplating leaving Omaha and we've been here for a long time. And so I'm going to share a memory I have recent, just a few years back. Trevor was in middle school and they were doing a Christmas program. Okay.
Mhm.
And Reagan was home from college. And so she came and she brought her boyfriend. Okay.
Mhm.
And we are at the school that Reagan went to in middle school, grew up in the community. Okay. And we're sitting there, and people are coming over, adults, and saying hi to Reagan and asking her what she's doing now. And, all these neighbors, this community that she's grown
Yep.
up at, that they've seen her grow up. She's introducing her boyfriend. And so the program is starting, and her boyfriend looks at her and says, "This is not how I grew up. I don't have this community of people who know me from childhood." Okay. So, and Reagan was like, "Oh, yeah." So at that moment, I was like, what a gift to to have this sense of community, to have these people who have surrounded my children through their childhood. It's that it takes a village.
Right.
And that's what I felt like. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the village that has lifted up my children, lifted me up, and we've all, been going through this journey together.
So true.
I know, but so that's the thing that, and I know I can create that in a new location,
Mhm.
but I think that's the thing. If we move to a different city, that's the thing I'm going to miss, is that village. Because
I get it.
just coming back, going to church on a holiday with my children and the village being there, it's just,
So I'm with you on that. I'm going to circle back to the comment on the lady about I looked up in the sky. So one thing, so Garrett and I, we're empty nesters, but we have Zeke, our dog, and we have Larry, his father-in-law, that live with us. And Garrett and I, we both work remotely, but of our projects we're working on, I tell you, 70% are ones that we both are working on together. So we have a funny that we say we have a little hot tub that is right outside my door here, which is very convenient because my she cave has the hot tub, the fire pit, everything. I mean, like everybody needs a she cave. I'm just going to throw that out there. If there's one thing you want a she cave. I'll give you a whole look at mine. But we call it our board meeting because it's his dad never goes in the hot tub because of heats too much with all of his health issues, and of course the dog doesn't. So it's like our one time, and I tell you, almost every night we go in the hot tub um, and we talk, and I always call it our board meeting. But last night I made the comment to him, it's funny how we look, I'm like, oh my gosh, the moon, everything is so bright, right? Like there's some nights that the moon is so bright that you think you'd have outdoor lights on. It's just so bright where we live. But I was looking at, I said, Garrett, isn't that funny? Look at the moon was up over here. Look at it's behind those trees. I said, well, and he's an engineer by trade. And, usually he researches these things. I'm like, isn't that funny how that moon moves around? And then I looked at him and I said, isn't it even more funny that I'm just noticing this now? And he said, it's because it's so clear here. Because we look at the sky, we look at the stars, we listen to the birds. And I would tell you, back to meeting in the middle, I love living here. And back to the spreadsheet, the days of sunshine, things that I didn't get in Omaha. I had a hot tub in Omaha. I would notice the moon when it was really beautiful and full and would hit the clouds a certain way. It's a whole different look up here. And when you made that comment about she looked in the sky and said, this is home, for me to look in the sky and say, this is home and I love it here, is a big stretch for me who, kind of left kicking and screaming from Omaha.
right. And I'm going to say you can love two places. You can love everywhere you lived. It's not like, I loved Kansas City. I loved Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Right.
Um, I loved, and I think I would go back to any of them. And I loved Omaha. I do love Omaha. So I think no matter where you live, you can love other places.
Right. And I think back to that bloom where you're planted, I think I do a good job of that in general. Even though I said, oh, I didn't love it in Denver, I tried. You know what I mean? I get,
Yeah.
and we found ways to be happy. I'm sure Garrett wasn't loving coming to Omaha in the middle of winter when he could have been skiing in Denver.
Right,
We,
right,
we
right.
were happy to be together, right? Back
Right.
to following that advice. But part of it is bloom where you're planted and know you have options, right? But I like yours. I think that is the most sound advice, and of not hearing that advice when I was preparing the spreadsheet and having all these debates with my husband. um, I think that's very sound advice for everybody to think about, whether it be moving houses, whatever that location is for a person, is look at what you want, but also look at what you're going to leave. Because innately, that's what helped me. And I didn't have, I wish I would have thought about it that way from the very beginning, because I think it would have helped a lot.
Yeah. So we need to move to questions.
Okay.
And there's a few more questions on the article I'll share
Oh,
after
good.
our quick
Okay.
break.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So to wrap up this conversation on this article, there's a few more questions, and then we have a few more other questions. We have lots of questions today. So we said one of the questions is, what am I losing if I leave? What am I gaining if I leave? That's the other one. So what are you going to gain? And there can be some good stuff there. What's your goal for moving? What's your backup plan? And this last one, this is the one I really wanted to get to. Is this the right move?
Mhm.
Okay. And when I was reading this, you don't know that answer when
Right.
you're making the move. That's the
How do
that's
you
the
know?
kicker of that question. You don't.
Isn't it, Amy, when you listed those other questions you just said, they were all really good. I like the one about what are you going to gain? Because one thing I gained by moving is it provided me an opportunity to reinvent myself, which was
Yeah.
harder to do in Omaha because everybody identified me as being the person at the CPA firm, my finance background, which I get. But moving gave me, I could much easier, gives you a fresh start. And for me, I could choose how I wanted to identify myself because I've done a lot of things. And if I don't want to highlight that, they don't know. Right.
Right.
But I think my point is what was the very last question? Are you choosing the right place?
Is this the right move?
Do you think the answer to that question is to diligently go through all the ones before?
Oh, totally.
Because
Yes.
you don't know the answer. So it's your diligence. The best, it's doing
Yeah.
anything, you got to do due diligence. I'm back to my finance background. You don't buy a business without doing due diligence.
And sometimes you have to be somewhere to know if it's right, because you can make all these assumptions about a place that you're going to, and hopes and dreams of that place, and that may not be the reality. You may move in and have horrible neighbors,
Sure.
and and be miserable, and then it's like, okay, maybe this wasn't the right move. Maybe I need to do something different. I
And
think
we,
yeah, Reagan, like we were talking this weekend, she started college at a college that she ended up transferring away from after her freshman year. It wasn't the right move. She determined that, but she wouldn't have known that without going there. And she tried it and she moved away. So,
good for her.
yeah. Um, okay. Let's do this question. If you decide to move, what are some ways to ease the transition away from your family and friends?
Go back often.
Yeah.
That's kind of what did when in Boise, I would go back at least. I kept a job. Another thing why Boise was a joyful year is I did go back quite a bit. We kept the house in Omaha for uh, 3/4 of the year, and I would go back a week a month. So it wasn't a hard break for me. I still had a son back there, lot back to the friends and family. I tell you that was one thing is for me is I didn't completely, there's other ways to not sever ties, but I, I eased into it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're lucky that you could do that. And I'm wondering, what are the things that you're doing now to continue that? Because you don't have the house in Omaha. You're not going back to Omaha as much.
I think it's maintaining contact, the relationships, like my point on the group texts, uh, sometimes reaching out, whether it be there's been FaceTime calls last night, even things like me starting the virtual book club. You know what I've really enjoyed about that? I have these different communities of people, my running friends who are my best friends, right? Relatives. And it's been for me, I love to create community. That has been awesome for me because I get a real uh, high happiness factor for my people that are important to me in my life to even bring them together. So, I got creative, right? It's COVID. I haven't been back in Omaha for over a year, but I feel like I'm talking to all my different people. And for me, that the creativity of the virtual book club was I was sharing something I love with people I love and meeting new people. And the cross meeting, like last night, it's like, oh, Renata, we grew up in the same hometown. Christy, and they're like, oh, we've been on 2 different calls together. We're friends. Another 2, they become friends. I that gives me other people that might not be important, but for me, I really enjoy that.
So I think technology has changed this concept a ton, because I think about when I moved in high school, we were writing letters. And
Right. Oh, I was a big letter writer. Were you a big letter writer?
oh yeah, and the phone calls were rare because it was very expensive to
Understood.
call long distance. So the technology but I like the way you're being really intentional about creating these platforms for everybody to come together instead of just randomly letting it happen. Because I think if you randomly let connections happen, then you're going to lose some connections, and
Right.
you're going to lose some of that uh, those people that are important to you. So I'm taking that advice, because if we move to Kansas City, there's some groups of people that I want to be very intentionally connected to.
And we do have that, Amy. That's so true with technology. I'll use my example. For me, that's a great example because I love to read. And some people don't love to read as much as I do, but then they're like, oh, I need to read more. So I'm going to join once every quarter.
Right.
And even some dialogue back to platforms, as much as we talk about social media, there's a lot of good that can come out of it too. The other
Yes.
comment I'd make to you is a very good point about, so what happened to me is when my parents moved, I lost my community because they weren't there, right? You're not going back home. All my friends are back because it's
Right.
Thanksgiving and Christmas, and now I'm going to Omaha to be by my fiance's family. And so other than class reunions, I've lost touch. Well, in this age of technology, I talk to, there's I tell you, so there's 44 in my graduating class, so 22 girls. There's group texts, there's FaceTime calls. During COVID, we did happy hour on Friday with whoever wanted to join from the class, boys and girls. So there were years that, back to your point, there was some letter writing. We were all busy because we were all just getting married and having kids. But there were probably about 10 years that I completely lost touch. And
Yeah.
through class reunions, then time kind of flies because the kids are getting older. But it is interesting how that community has come back together again. Zoom, technology. Some of us actually we meet once a year. Um, we actively go to our class reunions, but technology has helped us stay together, and that's after losing touch.
Yeah. I love that. That's great. Um, yeah. I'm just sitting here like thinking, I wonder if I should do that with my hot springs class, you know,
It's fun.
fun.
It
Yeah.
is. And then now what we find is almost every holiday, it will start with a group text, and everybody's throwing their memes in there, from
Mhm.
friends and turkeys. I could just expect, or one, her father passed away, so it's not all. And through that time period, there were texts every day on checking in and touching base because we grew up with her dad. Another lost a husband, and it's not just the fun and games. Technology, there's something about having a group of people talking to, right? And
Right.
that's why Zoom, group texts, and other platforms are helpful, virtual, because a one-on-one's a great thing, but back to community, sometimes it's nice to have more than the 2 people.
Right. Yeah. That's good. All right. Last question before our wrap is what's the real in these situations and what's the ideal? I'll start. The real, I think, is that change happens. And sometimes you do have to change locations. Have to, you're forced to. Sometimes you do it um, because you want to. There's all sorts of situations. And I think the ideal is just being open to it
I love
and
it.
loving and blooming where you're planting, like what you said, Sandy. Bloom where you're planted.
I'm not even gonna change up your ideal because I think that is perfect. The only real I would add to it is I think the real is sometimes we tell ourselves stories that we can't move. And if you don't have your feet implanted in cement, uh, it's highly likely that the I can't or that's not my choice probably isn't 100% true. So the real is challenge yourself on, doesn't mean you have to do anything, but challenge yourself on the thought process of I can't, and then
Yeah.
go through the because and just say, is that an absolute because I can't?
What's
Uh,
really true. I love that's a really good point. I love that because we all have
oh,
excuses,
I've done it. Oh,
reasons, whatever of
right.
why we are where we are and that we have no control.
And if you want a whole list of those, I could provide every one that I've told everybody about all. And I'm very, as Grant would say, Mom, when he was little, he used to always tell me to call the other parents on different things. Like if it was a big choice or with Freddie, he'd be like, Mom, will you please call Lucas's dad? You're very, oh gosh, what's the word he would always call me? Not convincing. What's the word for convincing? I'll have to think about
Persuade,
it.
like
He said,
persuade.
persuasive. You're very persuasive. And sometimes I can persuade myself in things and make them be true because I can be persuasive of myself. So I could give a whole list of all the times I said I couldn't make a move or I couldn't move my kids. And the real is I could have, no
Yeah.
matter how persuasive I was toward myself that I couldn't.
I love that. All right, let's do our wrap question really quick. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
I'm going to just throw this out there because I'm a big reader. I have never been to Europe. I'd love to spend a year living in Europe. So just go to Germany, go all over just to be
Yeah.
able to tour and kind of feel like I live there because I've never been there. And boy, have I read a lot about it. So I'm just going to, is it realistic? Probably not. But it seems like such a shame that I'm 53 years old and I've
I think
never
you need
spent
to
any
plan a
time
trip.
there. What?
You need to plan a trip, I think.
Well, once we're allowed, I don't, can
I
we
know.
go overseas right now?
Yeah, no,
And
but
you know what Garrett reminds me of? And then how would we get the dog over there? I'm like,
oh
okay.
yeah.
And then that gets me to think,
So I'm just going to tell you, my brother and his wife lived in Spain for almost a year, and they took their two cats. So it's doable.
I said, if we researched it, I'm sure we would find a way. But then we
Completely.
both get like back to the baby. It's like, well, will he be by our side? Or I'm like,
I,
celebrities move their animals all the time. Come on, there's got to be a way. But
there's a way.
that's a next year thing. The other thing is, we do have Larry too. So, but hey, that was a question.
Yeah.
You didn't get to. I do see with this wrap question, we don't have to discuss what's the real in this situation because we'll just stay away from that right now.
Right, right, right. Right. We're dreaming.
Dreaming.
Yes.
What about the dreamers?
Yeah, I'm dreaming. And my dream would be, I don't care, anywhere West Coast. I'd say I love the Pacific Coast. I love the water. I love the cliffs. I love just
Beautiful.
the beautiful Northern California, even going into I love Southern California, Oregon.
I
All
love
that.
Oregon. We've spent like 2 weeks there tops,
Yeah.
but yeah, there
Yeah.
are a lot of places, honestly, back to, I can say I'm very, very happy here, but gosh, I've always thought it'd be fun to do East Coast, like up
Oh yeah.
that Nantucket area, those cute little communities,
Yeah.
back to reading, I've read, we've spent some time up there, but kind of a quick drive through.
Right.
Um, yeah.
And that's like New York City. I'd love to be in New York City just for 1 year to go through all the
Right.
seasons of the city and just get to experience that. I think
You
it'd
know,
be
I spent, was it a week or 2 weeks in New York City? And I tried really, I played like, oh my God, I'm just gonna, and it was, in fact, I wrote a blog series about that. That had to have been 10 years ago. It was only a week, Amy,
uh-huh.
but I I always had this dream when I was that girl in Iowa that I wanted to live in a Chicago. I wanted to live downtown. I wanted to have my briefcase and my stuff. It was just this whole dream in the big city. Well, the big city ended up being Omaha, and I never lived back to living downtown, right? And so I did a make believe for the week that I kind of pretended I was that young girl. Now I was 40, but I'm gonna have my 2 weeks in New York because I was at a boutique hotel, right by Times Square.
Nice. How much fun.
It was a blast.
I bet.
Maybe it was only a week. It felt like more. I tried to make it more. It was my dream.
It's good. It still sounds like a ton of fun.
All right, Amy, how do we do? Are we doing okay on time?
Good. Yeah, it's time to wrap it up
Okay.
until next time.
All right. Well, everyone, until next time, we're getting close to Christmas here. So if you're watching, my Christmas tree is showing. Amy, I'm not seeing one on yours. Yours is in the other room.
Looks good. All right. Thanks,
Bye,
Sandy.
everybody.
Bye.